This video shows the operation of a Service Center Metals extrusion stretcher. Each SCM stretcher has small differences from the others, but the general operation is the same for each one. The stretching operation is performed for three primary reasons. 1. To stretch the metal straight due to quench distortion. 2. For dimensional tolerance conformance. And 3. To relieve the residual stress created during the quenching process. Basically, the outside of the extrusion cools before the inside, causing stress changes from inside to outside. Personal protective equipment, or PPE, which includes safety glasses, earplugs, arm protection, gloves, and steel-toed safety shoes, must be worn at all times while operating any stretcher. Make sure you have a working two-way radio, as communication is critically important in the role of stretcher operator. You will communicate with press operators, cold sawyers, pack team leaders, press managers, and others on topics such as equipment malfunctions or dimensional and surface issues on the products you're producing. Timely communication as a stretcher is paramount for safety, quality, and operational performance. Check the stretcher area for any slip or trip hazards. Be especially careful to make sure there is no oil or water on the floor. Water sometimes carries with the extrusions through the system, creating possible slip hazards on the floor. This water needs to be removed with rags immediately. Calibrate your micrometers, calipers, and any other measuring tools. Record the results in the calibration logbook. Let's get to know the equipment. The headstock is the main operator station, located closest to the press. It's a stationary unit with clamping jaws and a large hydraulic cylinder that extends and retracts to perform the actual stretching operation. The tailstock is a movable unit that rides along the stretcher bed, capable of traveling from 12 feet to 115 feet away from the headstock. The tailstock also has clamping jaws. Once the tailstock unit is moved into the desired location, locking pins extend into the stretcher bed, holding it in position for the stretch. Belts that transfer extrusions off the runout and toward the headstock are called the cooling table belts and are referred to as the K1 and K2 belts. The belts that transfer the extrusions into the headstock and tailstock are referred to as the T3 and T4 belts. Saw infeed rollers are utilized to transfer the batch of extrusions off the T4 and into the cold saw area. We start by turning on the stretcher via the panel view screen. Make sure the transfer belts are all working, do a visual check to make sure the safety shields are intact and operating correctly, and that there are no hydraulic leaks. Complete all items on the online light curtain inspection checklist. Check the SCM intranet web app called Stretcher/Cold Saw and see what die is scheduled to run and gather all run information. This information includes runout dimensional requirements, alloy, temper, and previous stretch percentage. Set up the stretcher to stretch the metal based on these previous run settings. Enter the stretch percentage and the release percentage into the panel view screen. Always have at least 0.2 for the release percentage. Enter the extrusion length to position the tailstock. Move the tailstock to match the runout length, and use the tailstock camera to check the positioning. Use the K1, K2, and T3 belt controls to move the metal to the stretcher. Position the ends of the extrusions on the lower jaws of both the headstock and tailstock. Make sure you understand the allowable trim and only grip what's required to adequately stretch the extrusions. Press the start button to stretch the extrusion. The shields will close, the stretcher jaws will close, and the metal is then stretched. Always keep clear of the jaws during this process. The first extrusion's dimensions always need to be checked. Convey the extrusions back on the cooling table, retract the T3 belts, pause the stretcher, place your danger tag on the pause button, and then enter the stretcher bed. Check the dimensions of the first extrusion. Understand that the first extrusion may not fully represent the ongoing dimensional conformance of the run. As additional billets are extruded, the die gets hotter and fills in better. Some time is required for the process to stabilize. Check the dimensions of the second extrusion to make sure they are in specification or capable of being stretched into specification. Once again, you'll need before and after dimensional inspection to understand the influence the stretch is having on the extrusions. After that, check every fifth extrusion for consistency. If the extrusions get close to going out of spec, check every billet until it's under control. If you're not capable of stretching the extrusions into specification, communicate with your press manager immediately. He will most likely instruct you on alternative stretching techniques, make adjustments to the extrusion process, or pull the die off. In any event, if the material is not conforming, a die repair report must be generated to communicate with die repair about the specifics of the dimensional issues. All data must be entered into the stretcher system to accurately maintain a history of each die's performance. Use the T3 and T4 belts to move the stretched extrusions to the cold saw area. At times when the cooling table gets full, you can flip the extrusions on their sides to allow more room for the extrusions going to the cold saw area. If a tailstock operator is required, make sure they are instructed to keep their hands away from belt pinch points and all other moving parts. Handle all extrusions as prescribed by the stretcher operator, and always keep hands clear while the stretcher is in operation. After each extrusion is positioned for clamping, the tailstock operator must raise their hands in the air to signal all clear before the headstock operator is allowed to close the jaws and start the stretching cycle. Watch every billet drop in case it gets hung in the puller. When using the rod stretch table, find the rod you're producing on the left side. Slide right to find the amount in thousandths that the rod needs to be stretched. Then go to the top of that column to get the required stretch percentage. Tap or spit on any metal to check the temperature before touching it barehanded. Always check the stencil to verify the press crew is stenciling the product with the correct information. Check the unstretched extrusions for blisters, die lines, speed tears, and tool rubs. Communicate any material flaws, bow problems, or bad dimensions to the press operator immediately. If you have to flip wet metal, don't flip them on top of each other. Make sure the 6063-T52 extrusions quench below 250 degrees before stretching. This is achieved by using a handheld pyrometer and is done for safety and quality reasons. First, to prevent the transfer belts from melting, and then to ensure the extrusions achieve the adequate mechanical properties. We are required to stretch all T6511 temper extrusions a minimum of 1% and ideally not greater than 3%. If you cannot achieve a minimum 1% stretch, report this to your press manager immediately. Once again, the die must be written up, indicating you couldn't achieve this 1% stretch. The ideal maximum of 3% is to prevent orange peeling or a rippled-like surface structure. It is acceptable to stretch over 3%, but once again, the die should be written up if you must do so. Never enter the cooling table, as there are two extremely hazardous 440-volt bus bars there. Be extremely cautious if the metal bows up on the cooling table, as you wouldn't want the extrusions to make contact with these bus bars. Do not move or walk through the gap in the runout, due to the danger of puller travel and the potential of coming into contact with these bus bars. Occasionally, we produce the same die extrusions for multiple orders with different requirements. One customer may want the product stenciled, while another may not, or they could even be different alloys. When this happens, the press manager will mark the last billet with the word "last." It is critically important that you keep these batches separated, as we don't want to send the wrong extrusions to any customer. This video covers the basics of stretcher operation, but it's required that you read and be familiar with the SCM's standard operating procedures for our stretchers, which goes into more detail. Thanks for watching, good stretching, and be safe.